Welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Day for November 2021. My name is Finn Blake and I'll be your host for the day. Up next this morning, we have Lumos Diagnostics. Lumos specializes in rapid, cost-effective and complete point-of-care diagnostic test solutions to help healthcare professionals more accurately diagnose and manage medical conditions. Lumos offers customized assay development and manufacturing services for point-of-care tests and proprietary digital reader platforms. Lumos also directly develops, manufactures, and commercializes novel Lumos branded POC tests that target infectious and inflammatory diseases. This morning, Rob Sambursky, the President and CEO of Lumos, will be presenting to us. As always, if anyone in the audience would like to submit a question for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation, please do type it in using the Q&A panel on your screen. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Rob.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to sharing as much as I can about Lumos. I think it's fun to do these presentations for me. It really gives me a chance to talk about a lot of the activity we have. So I like to start off with Lumos Diagnostics and really talk to the mission and the fact that we manufacture and develop and commercialize point-of-care tests that really produce an actionable result while the clinician is in the office visit. And that's very different than other point-of-care tests where they take a swab and they send it off. It's not really point-of-care the way we define it. At the same time, we're targeting a lot of unmet needs with our branded products. And I think that puts us in a very differentiated position. From a structural standpoint, Lumos has two facilities. We have one in Sarasota, Florida, that's primarily our administrative headquarters. We do our high throughput manufacturing in Sarasota and some R&D. And in Carlsbad, it's a little bit of the reverse. We have much more of an R&D focus and some manufacturing. When you look at what our capabilities are, and this is important in terms of driving the overall view of Lumos, we have the ability to generate about 10 million test strips per month. We have around 125 employees, and we have today about 42,000 square feet worth of facility. We have automated equipment in Sarasota, and we can do pilot batch, small semi-automated activities in Carlsbad. We're fully MDSAP certified, which means that we subject ourselves voluntarily to a regulatory review and audit every year. And that keeps us from being in a position where an agency walks in and shuts us down. And it really demonstrates the high quality products that we put forward. So let's talk about last year as a way to have a window into what we look like this year. So last year, fiscal year 2021, we finished with 25 million in revenue. We were up 198%. And that was driven from a commercial services business that had 22.7 million, which was up 188%, as well as a product business driven by our flagship product, FebriDx, that had 2.3 million in revenue. We also put together a global manufacturing capability to do the 10 million rapid diagnostic test strips. This is important because it gives us access to new clients, gives us access to go after government tenders, especially with the NIH and RADx. And then we completed our pivotal clinical trial in support of our FebriDx US 510K clearance. It's called the Disrupt trial, and we were able to submit for FDA 510K review. And then we developed a couple other products, a COVIDx product, which is our version of a rapid antigen test for COVID, and a COVID flu product that's just now completed development and in the process of going through regulatory review. And so when you look at Lumos and you think about us as a point-of-care diagnostics company, you have to think what that really means in terms of market opportunity. By 2025, Point of care is expected to be about a $50 billion market opportunity, of which we're focusing on North America, Australia, and Europe. And within that niche, we're really looking at infectious disease initially, which carves out to about a 3 billion opportunity. And we support a whole bunch of other clients that really expands beyond our branded product focus in infectious disease to complement a whole variety of different groups, whether it's animal health, food safety, or just working on other diagnostics for human disease. And so we have our branded business that's continuing to develop products. And then on our service side of the business, we take assays from other people, or at least concepts from other people, and we develop complete solutions. And part of the complete solution that we use for our partners, as well as on the branded side in our next gen, is that we use readers. And these readers can take a picture of a test strip and can ultimately help to digitize that result and interface with electronic medical records. On the left, we have a digital single-use disposable test. Imagine this is a pregnancy test that says yes, no, and you throw it away. In the middle, I think of this as a potential way to go into the OTC market in the future for self-testing, where you have a reader that reads the result, can read it for a specific test, do it 10 times, 20 times, and then throw it away. And it can send those results directly to your phone. You can even get the instructions for use on your phone. And then that desktop reader, which is our version of a menu-based application, where you can think of having FebriDx and potentially our COVID flu tests and other commodity-like tests all on a reader, but people want to drive towards that reader because of FebriDx being a novel assay. And so when you think about where we are from a branded perspective, largely I like to focus on overuse of antibiotics. Most people are completely consumed by the fact that we have COVID. It's a global pandemic. It's had a major impact on everybody. And beneath the surface of the COVID is this underlying additional pandemic, and it's drug-resistant bacteria or superbugs. And the large reason we have this situation is because doctors have difficulty differentiating a virus from a bacteria. And so they err on the side of giving an antibiotic when they don't necessarily need to. And so ultimately, we see an overuse of antibiotics, which leads to not only antibiotic resistance, but you get side effects. It's not perfectly safe to give an antibiotic. In fact, 1 in 10 people might get a rash, or get something like a nausea, vomiting, C. diff, colitis, which is a more severe condition, might even get something like anaphylaxis where they die. And that can happen very frequently and cause a lot of cost to the system and people coming back to see the doctors. There's also the issue with just managing a drug-resistant patient. That means isolation, cocktails of drugs, and again, costs. So imagine that there's a solution, and that solution we believe is FebriDx. The elegance of FebriDx really lies in its simplicity and its ability to identify an infection and then tell you whether it's a bacterial infection that requires antibiotics. And if it's not a bacterial infection, then perhaps it's a viral or a negative infection. And so the ability to quickly do a finger stick, collect a small sample of blood, transfer it directly to the test strip, push a button, and get a result all within 10 minutes. And we're looking at dual biomarkers. Myxovirus resistance protein A, which is a viral biomarker, and it's very specific, and C-reactive protein, which is a non-specific biomarker. But when you put them together and you have an elevation in MXA with or without CRP, we know you have a viral infection. If you don't have an elevation in MXA, just an elevated CRP, we know it's bacterial. And if you just have a blue line, we know that you're probably in the convalescent phase or you've gotten better and you're no longer infectious and you can go back to work, school, or daycare. And so this becomes a very powerful tool. and we have very strong data to support it. We have sensitivities that range in the 93 to 95% range for bacterial, with specificities around 91%, and a negative predictive value that ranges between 97 and 99%. We also have sensitivity of about 77% for viral and about 85% specificity for viral infection. But the two key drivers are the negative predictive value and the positive predictive value. So you can comfortably rule out a bacterial infection if you have a 99% negative predictive value, and you can rule in a viral infection if you have a 90% or greater PPV. And so all of this data comes from completing our Disrupt clinical trial. Again, we have submitted this material to the FDA. We had predetermined success criteria and we passed those. And then we have strong clinical and microbiological definitions that really enhance the ability to prove that we can detect viral and bacterial infection. And so if you have a good triage test for viral versus bacterial infection, and you actually determine there's a virus, then it's important to say, does this patient have COVID? Do they have influenza A? And our response on the COVID side is COVID-X. What makes our test different from the others is that we compared it to a very high sensitive PCR. Unlike what you may have heard in the news in Australia, we detect all of the Delta variants and all of the variants, in fact, not just the Delta. Somehow there was some misinformation out there that there was a problem with variants. It's a regulatory requirement that we can't specifically call out the variants. The product's manufactured in the US. We recently received Health Canada clearance and are just now preparing for our launch there. And when you look at the sensitivity against a high quality PCR as the reference method, we have nearly 100% sensitivity when you are looking at very small levels, cycle thresholds less than 35, and we still have a high specificity of 95%, even in low prevalence times. This is a very good test. And when you look at our pipeline, we have other complementary tests, including Virodex, which merges COVID with flu A and flu B. So again, if you're viral positive on FebriDx, you can immediately do a Virodex test and determine if the more critical viruses are present. We intend to digitize our FebriDx tests, both in a multi-use disposable as well as one that goes onto a menu. And then we have future products related to urinary tract infection and sepsis along the way. From a service side of the business, as I mentioned, we provide complete solutions, assay development, customization of a reader, and actual manufacturing. And so when you look at how we have combined our business, you can see revenues that grew over from fiscal year 2019 to 2021. But what's more important is how the revenue has changed in terms of its mix. We initially were just a service business looking at contract development. We then expanded into contract manufacturing, and we only had 1 or 2 months of contract manufacturing. So this year, we'll see a lot more contract manufacturing. We did have a blowout year on the development services, which is not sustainable. That was largely driven by COVID, but we're hopeful that the contract manufacturing will offset some of the reduction that we see in the actual development services. We are still doing development services work. We've got a lot of new projects coming out. It took about a quarter for people to come back from COVID to all get vaccinated, and for people in different companies to regain their desire to create testing. And that's where we are today. And so when we look at the margin, as we actually transition from being a development service group to one that has contract manufacturing, we see a bump in the margin. As we start to sell our own branded products, that margin goes up even more. And as we now start launching our COVID-X product in Canada, and then eventually we have the ability to bring the Virodex and the FebriDx into the US, those margins will continue to improve. We have been trying to do our best to control expenses, and we've been moving briefly over the past year with moments where we were, monthly cash flow break even, but ultimately we're a growth business and we're looking to expand and to prepare for the US full commercialization of FebriDx once the gates open. Ultimately, we've had a few first quarter highlights that I want to call people's attention to. First, we were listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. That's a big milestone in the life of our company. At the same time, we've expanded our operations such that we have a new facility that can do up to 10 million test strips a month. We have we're now up to 11 active R&D service projects. We brought on the immediate former Surgeon General for the US, Jerome Adams, to help us as a health advisor and to help manage our ad boards. We've built out a very strong ad board in infectious disease, as well as in primary care and in urgent care. And then we've had multiple papers come out showing the actual utility of FebriDx. So when I look out over the course of the next year, you're going to see diversifying revenue in fiscal year 2022. That's largely driven by less on the contract services, more on the contract manufacturing, because we'll have a full year of it. We'll have at least 6 months of product sales, which is better than we had in the past. We're going to be able to focus on getting the US 510(k) clearance and ultimately publish on the data and the cost analysis, which recently came out on the actual antibiotic benefits, but we have another cost analysis looking at testing and how cost effective FebriDx can be. We intend to launch both COVIDX and VIRIDX, which are completely synergistic with FebriDx. And then ultimately we're working on second generation digital platforms. So when you think about the milestones, I think there are a lot. There's a 510(k) clearance coming with FebriDx in the next several weeks. We have the EUA authorization for VIRIDX, as well as Health Canada approval. We already have the COVIDX approved in Health Canada as an interim order. We hope to have the TGA, COVIDX and VIRIDX down the line. And then we have these gates open from a regulatory perspective, and then we can roll things out. So we'll have a commercial rollout in the US and in Canada, antimicrobial stewardship campaigns. We'll have several papers that will help justify both the clinical utility as well as the economic advantages to doing it. And we'll continue to build on our strong and robust pillar of medical advisors. So to pull this off, you need to have a strong team. Everyone says they have the best team. I simply say that our team has to be good because our functional areas have led to growth in the business up to 25 million, which was 200%. We had the ability to grow from about 25 people to 125 people. We built out the facility that can do 10 million strips. So you have to have the right team to pull off those type of milestones. And ultimately, we have an executive director in Sam Lanyon as the chair and non-executive directors that ultimately bring operational experience, finance experience, and digital healthcare. And then from a compliance perspective, we've aligned ourselves with Melanie Layden as our CFO based in Australia, as well as our COSEC, to make sure we're always compliant. And so with that background, I think that long-term over the next several years, we're going to see growth. We're going to see an opportunity to really take advantage of having several branded products. I think the branded products will continue to expand, while in the background, we are successfully transitioning products from development services into manufacturing. And that's the perfect lifestyle. Also gives us a chance to see what's going on under the hood on some of that contract development, because someday those products could end up on the branded side of the business. And so I'll just stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Rob. We do actually have a couple of questions, so please continue putting them in the Q&A panel, but I'd love to get stuck straight into them. So The first one is, if there are no issues with the COVID-X test or the accuracy/trial data submitted, why did the US FDA deprioritize the UEA app?
So in the US, there are several potential differences from other regulatory places. For one, they're prioritizing OTC as one of the main things that they're focusing on, and this was not a self-test. Second, they're prioritizing our Virodex test, which is looking at panels. And in the US, there were some issues in terms of how we were interpreting some of the discrepant cases. And so we have ideas on how to overcome that, but ultimately it's just a question of not being the products that they want first.
Now, in terms of the Febridex trial at Box Hill Hospital in Melbourne, when are the results expected, and when's it expected to be finished?
So that's a question that I don't know exactly the answer to. The study has commenced, and if I had to just venture a guess, because a lot of it has to do with the prevalence and how frequently people are coming and how the consent rates are going. But I'm guessing that's probably a 2 or 3 month study, in which case we won't get the results probably until the end of the third quarter.
Now, Rob, what does actually keep you up at night when it comes to the business? It does seem that, regulatory approvals is a factor.
So for sure, regulatory clearances are by far one of the top things that keep me up. I think the time zones that I have to manage are also challenging between Europe and Australia. And I say that as just a joke, but the reality is we are managing multiple geographic locations. I think also it's a timing issue. How do you balance when you scale a company and prepare for the next phase when you have these regulatory gates that are somewhat fluid? And I'll also say that COVID is a mixed blessing. On one hand, it's driving a lot of business to the company and it's giving us development services and contract manufacturing. But because of COVID, it created a whole unpredictability around timing for regulatory approvals such as Febridex.
Awesome. And probably got time for one more, Rob. What is the main reason that you're confident in the Lumos business as we approach the new year?
So I think there's a couple answers to this. One is our structure is basically designed where we have a win on development services. We have a unique platform, so we're constantly bringing that business in and driving it into contract manufacturing, which I think provides revenue. It gives us exposure to new technology, and it basically buffers us against any of these time issues that we might have on the regulatory side for our branded products. From a branded perspective, I think we have novel assays that are completely complementary and they actually drive into the same sales channel. So it's a perfect fit once the gates open and we're allowed to sell.
Rob Sambursky, thank you so much for your time today.